Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CoronaSphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle. I am going to full afterburner on the volume. A lot of people said the volume's been low. I've got it as high as it's a going. So hopefully that'll be a little bit better. Welcome to the plane of infinite despair. Just a brief subject today. I find that these single subject shows tend to be a little more useful. So today we want to talk a little bit about the efficacy of masks. I was not a real skeptic about masks. I always knew that the loose kind of masks, sometimes you'd see people, I remember in the early days, you'd see people with their sweaters pulled up like this and so on. It's clear to me and to most people know a tiny little bit about that's not going to be effective in protecting you. And that you need these specific type masks that do in fact make enough of a seal so they can filter out viruses to protect you. But that's because I really kind of misunderstood the guts of the argument, and my opinion on this was changed radically by a look at a piece of video that I'm going to show you in just a moment here. The case for the masks is not to protect you from the virus. I think actually, if I had one, and I'm waiting to get one, I think I would print on mine, this isn't for me, this is for you, because that's basically what it comes down to. The entire argument does come down to that, and until you actually see it with your own eyes, it's really remarkable. So the argument and the case I'm going to show you not a 15-minute video this time, just a 4-minute video that used lasers. Japanese researchers used lasers to be able to detect extremely small, like micrometer size particles in the air and track them and follow them out. And when you see how much particles you actually put out, it's certainly enough to make you want to go out and get yourself a mask. So I'm going to play this in just a moment, and certainly we'll talk about it when we're done. But there's one thing I would suggest that you look for. When you see some of these images, it's video, you'll know it when you see it. But when it starts off with a sneeze, and a sneeze is obviously a sneeze just this explosion of particles. But they'll show a bit where there are these two people just in regular conversation. And when somebody opens their mouth to speak, these invisible, extremely small aerosols do two things. There's essentially a waterfall of them that just comes out of your mouth. These are the heavier particles, comes out about to here and just falls to the ground or to the table surface or whatever happens to be below your mouth at that time. And then you can see finer particles that just simply stay out there in the air. The mask is not there to protect you against those incoming particles. The mask is there to make sure that you don't put those particles out there in the first place. You will be. I was struck by just how many particles that you're putting out, and towards the end of this video, they do a computer simulation based on the data that they've gotten from this form of imaging these small particles, and they do a computer simulation of what happens in the course of a conversation in a typical office building. So I love the comments. Is that looks like Vaso says make you never want to talk to someone in person again. It's all too true. With that said, I do hope that when this whole thing is over, we don't go into this kind of sterilize the world mode. I think that's an entirely bad idea, but that's a story for another time. So anyway, here's the video. And it's about 3 or 4 minutes long, and when it's done, we'll come back and talk a little bit about it and a couple of other news stories out there today as well. So let's get rolling, and here we go.
はい、レーザーください。
The team will track particles in the air using laser beams and a high-sensitivity camera. This technology allows us to detect droplets as small as 0.1 micrometers wide. The experiment starts. First, sneezing. We can see a large droplet about 1 millimeter in diameter. It quickly falls. But let's look through the high-sensitivity camera. We can see small particles that seem to glitter floating through the air. These particles are all smaller than 10 micrometers, or 1/100th of a millimeter in diameter. Let's take a look from a different angle. They're small and light. You can see them drifting through the air. These are microdroplets. We're learning that sneezing isn't the only source of these droplets.
バナナボートとか乗ったら楽しいですよ。
いや、絶対楽しい、ね。
めちゃくちゃ楽しい。僕、彼女
We ran the same experiment on a close-range conversation. People generate a lot of microdroplets when they talk loudly. The droplets between these two stay where they are. They don't drift away. It's not yet known what volume of microdroplets leads to infection. But Tateda says we can't rule out the possibility that microdroplets have spread the virus to some extent.
そのマイクロ飛沫、小さな粒子の中にもたくさんのですね、生きたウイルスがいて、大きな声での会話、あるいは激しい息遣い、そういった中でですね、このマイクロ飛沫ができて、それが近くの人、その人が吸い込むことによって感染が広がる、そういったリスクが見えてきたものと思います。
This lab is simulating the movement of microdroplets in an airtight room. About 10 people in an enclosed space the size of a classroom. A person coughs once and spreads about 100,000 droplets. Large droplets are shown in blue and green. Most of these fall to the ground within 1 minute. But the microdroplets, shown in red, continue to drift. This simulation uses only microdroplets. 5 minutes later. 10 minutes later. 20 minutes later. The microdroplets are still floating in place.
And now you know you have an immune system. It's great having the audience we have, the level of the average level of intelligence in the people watching the show is just extremely flattering to me. For example, during the video presentation on the live stream, our friend Martin Archer said that the lesson that you can learn from this is, so long as you don't go into a room where there are green lasers, you'll be fine. And I think that's exactly right. There's an important point to stress here. The sneeze is obvious, and by the way, with all due respect to that test subject, that was the nastiest sneeze I think I've ever seen in my life. If I saw that in the real world, I'd go out and get myself scrubbed down like I'd just come out of a reactor core or something. However, there's a bigger point here, and the point is it's not the sneeze and it's not the cough. What the video is showing basically is that we are constantly putting out just this shower. Almost all of it, in terms of volume, is pretty heavy and falls, if not to our feet, then just a foot or two in front of us, and that's where most of it goes. These microdroplets that hang in the air, they seems to be backing up some of the evidence we've been seeing about where and how people get the virus, there seems to be some evidence that it's not a question of, hey, I walked into a room where somebody had was COVID-19 positive. It seems to be that unless you have direct physical contact with that person or something, it seems to be some evidence that you have to be in an enclosed space for a relative period of time, which would make sense because obviously the bulk of the infectious droplets are going down. But the thing that I think is really worth mentioning about this is all of the stuff that we do in terms of the hand sanitizers and the washing your hands and all of that stuff. All of that is designed to mitigate our contact with microscopic aerosols that contain active viruses in them on surfaces. So you know as well as everybody by now that if you touch your face, your mouth, and you go and open a handle on a room door, you leave live viruses there. The next person then opens the handle, gets on their hand, they touch their face all the time as humans do, and that's one way to spread this. And all of that is important and necessary, but the use of masks, forget about the microparticles that are out there in the air. The main benefit, it seems to me, is that the use of masks stops this waterfall of heavy particles and basically maintains a much lower level of viruses on the surfaces in your environment, in your room, or so on. I didn't really think that they were of much use. The N95 is the one that actually will filter viruses out. I'd seen people with bandanas around their faces, and to be honest with you, I actually kind of felt like, no, that person just doesn't know anything about anything. Turns out I was wrong about that one. Analysis of these microdroplets say that if you were to do something as simple as a bandana, just a piece of cloth over your face, you can probably reduce the amount of those aerosol droplets by 50%. A decent mask will take that up to 75 or 80%, and then one of the N95 masks make it 100%. But if you're able to take off as many of these particles as possible, then you're doing a job. Anyway, it had a profound effect on me, and I thought maybe it would have an effect on you, so I thought I'd share that with you today. Two other little stories before we call it a day here on the CoronaSphere Lounge. I was not able to get too deep into them, but I did see something that was interesting. This data is peer-reviewed, and the reason I have some confidence in the source is because the claim was that they may be starting to see the flattening of the curve in New York. And once they presented the charts, which I'll show you, the graphs, the first thing they did was say here are many reasons why this may be something other than what we say it is. They talk about expanding the testing base. They talk about all the variables that could produce the results that you're going to see in this graph. And to me, that is a sign of credibility. However, they said that even though some or all of these may be working, and in fact, to some degree, almost all of them are working on the results, nevertheless, it could also show a significant change. So here's the data curve. I did not get the source, for which I apologize, but it was a medical journal. So here's the infectious rate curve for New York as of 3:30. So yesterday, I think. You can see that according to the people who put this research together, the points in pink represent everything that happened before the lockdown, and then all of the so-called mango color ones. I would just go with yellow and but I'm not, but let's call them camel maybe, or the sand color. The mango colored dots are the number of infections per day. Scale is logarithmic. But nevertheless, that's pretty clear. Now, again, it doesn't mean that this is exactly what's happening, but it is certainly going in the direction we want it to go. And while the authors of the article say there may be other factors involved in terms of the methodology and the sampling, nevertheless, they wouldn't have published if they didn't believe there was a strong case for there being a signal in the noise. So you take it with a bit of a grain of salt, but my God, I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting. This is the first graph I have seen, first any kind of evidence of any kind I've seen that has to do with social distancing that's showing a result. I knew we'd see one sooner or later, and undoubtedly we'll continue to see more as we get more and more data, more and more tests, and so on and so forth. But that's a pretty good piece of news. Now, here's something interesting. Compare this New York curve with the curve for California in general, Los Angeles County. If you look at the trend line, the black line, you can see that there's a slight reduction, but it's not nearly so dramatic as New York. We'll go back to New York again for a second. I mean, the New York line is clearly something has happened there at the point where the lockdowns occurred when the dots go from pink to yellow. But here in California, if you got a good sense for reading charts, you can kind of see that it is coming down slowly, but not nearly as dramatically as New York. And that raises an interesting question on an article that I saw from a man I respect enormously. He's not a medical doctor, but I consider him to be a man of enormous intellectual integrity. And that's our friend Victor Davis Hanson, who has an article in National Review. He's talked about herd immunity. Herd immunity is the idea that when enough people have developed, have had the disease and then survive it, they have antibodies, and once a certain percentage of the population has enough antibodies, the virus no longer can make the leap from one person to another and essentially dies out. Best way to think about that is if you've got a hillside full of dry grass and dry bushes like we have here in California. When they're densely packed, that fire will rage like crazy, but if you spread the fuel out to the point where the fire has to go further and further and further to get to the next branch, eventually you'll reach a point where you space the fuel out so wide that while the fire may occasionally make the jump, over time that fire is going to burn itself out. I didn't pull any quotes from this, but I will tell you Dr. Hanson's hypothesis. It's just a hypothesis. He is saying that California, in all of the models prior to the actual outbreak, and for many, many other reasons, including California having the highest poverty rate in the nation, California having the highest homeless rate in the nation, California's entire infrastructure and healthcare system is extremely poor, and there's a lot of high-risk people in California, and yet Hansen says that the numbers for California are remarkably low, shockingly low, somewhere between Germany and was it Hong Kong or Singapore? Well below what most other countries are seeing. And I should have pulled the quote, but if memory serves, California's mortality rate is something like 1/8 of New York. It's some really remarkable number like that. Hansen is putting another, and again, it's a hypothesis, but he's putting another marker down on something that's been going around and hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention, but that is the idea that the COVID-19 virus has been with us longer than we think. That symptoms were showing up in China, in Wuhan, as early as September. They were classified as the flu or something like that, but there's a number of people discussing the idea that the actual virus, because so much of it is asymptomatic, because many patients have tested positive for patients. Many individuals have tested positive for it with no symptoms at all, didn't even know they had it. Many of the symptoms are very light and maybe were just attributed to a cold or a flu or so on. I'm not trying to make the argument that this virus isn't anything to worry about. It's not what I'm saying. But one of the potential ideas that's floating around out there is that this entire infection strain started considerably earlier, months earlier than we think. Hansen's conclusion is that since California Los Angeles specifically, is the #1 destination for Chinese tourists. And since, I forget what the number was again, I want to say it's about 8,000 or 10,000 visitors a day from China, including direct flights from Wuhan, which have been going on for months prior to President Trump cutting off air travel to China. The hypothesis is that California has this much, much lower rate than New York because it's possible that significant numbers of Californians have been exposed to this virus and have already developed immunity to it. And given the weather conditions in California, contracted a pretty mild version. I know that the temperature doesn't directly affect COVID-19, but since it is transmitted in a flu-like fashion, places like California, very, very uncommon to get the flu here because, well, for one thing, we're not huddling around in buildings, and it's not like every single person, like in a Chicago office building, everybody's got the flu at some point or another. Probably 5 people on the floor have the flu or a cold at any time, and it just goes round and round and round and round. You have a highly infected population. I think Lord Bios has educated me to the degree to say there was a high morbidity. There's a lot of disease out there, and so the cycle of colds and flu and more colds and more flu and more sneezing and more viruses on everything is definitely higher in these colder northern climates, and in warmer climates we're not that closely pushed together, and colds are far less common in places like California, Arizona than they are in Chicago or New York. Now, the one thing that I have not heard anybody talking about with any significant amount of emphasis is this. Let's go back one more time. Here's the New York curve, and the orange dots represent potentially significant decrease in the cases are not decreasing. The rate of increase is slowing. Important difference, but still good news. So why is New York, if these data is correct, we'll just say for the sake of the argument that there is in fact real signal in this noise, why is New York's reduction so much more dramatic than California's is in terms of what happens after the social distancing things have been put into effect? And I have to tell you, I don't know why this isn't top of the list. In New York, if you want to go from point A to point B, you can either go down into the subways and be packed cheek to jowl with people, any number of whom might be infected, inside a closed container, shooting through a tunnel at the bottom of the city, or you can get into a taxi which has God knows how many passengers in there on a daily basis, just rotating around, going for a couple blocks as a general rule, and then getting out, and then new people getting in, and so on. All of these things to me seem to be definitely vectors for an airborne aerosol coronavirus to spread. But here in California, and in much of the rest of the country, even before the Wuhan virus hit, we were all traveling around in our own completely self-contained virus isolation modules, otherwise known as automobiles. We would look at the traffic here, and we would see the enormous majority. I don't know what the numbers actually are, but I want to say to my eyes, it looks like it's in excess of 80%, maybe even more than 90%, of the people going to work by themselves and coming home by themselves. And that giant crush of humanity that you get in mass transit isn't happening, at least not in LA. And it never has happened. So it's not just a question of population. We have the second largest population in the country after New York in Los Angeles, but nothing like the infection rate. And I think a fair amount of that is due to the fact that we self-isolate on the way to work and self-isolate on the way out of work, and have been prior to the governor's order, and then Mayor Garcetti's Safer at Home, which is the nicest name for martial law I've ever heard. It's just got such a friendly feel to it. That was a kind of a flip remark. We have not seen soldiers in Humvees with rifles. So right now, to me, it still looks largely voluntary. That's another entire subject. But wouldn't it be ironic, In fact, it's not a question of ironic. It's a question of seeming to be pretty much indisputable that all of the urban futures that have been postulated and that the politicians in California just love, high-speed rail between concentrated population centers, the inability to zone for single housing home, Agenda 21 stuff, all this stuff. This idea of putting people into cities and getting them all close together and then giving them mass transit and so on, all of this seems to be, at the very least, going to be re-examined in the post-COVID-19 America. The plastic bag ban, which to me was an enormous vanity vote on the part of politicians who didn't have to deal with shopping with plastic bags. I want to say it was January 1st of 1914, if I remember correctly. You couldn't get plastic bags in LA County anymore. Had to get paper bags. And so people would start using these reusable canvas bags, which were perfect little laboratories to primarily grow bacteria. And they were tremendously more dangerous than the plastic bags. And then what finally happened was they decided to go back and the stores started issuing heavier plastic, significantly heavier plastic than the plastic bags you're used to at your grocery store, and they were calling them reusable plastic. Nobody ever reused them, but that was the fig leaf that we were using so that we could get the politics out of the way and go back to plastic bags, which are extremely useful, and less than 1% of all the plastic in the ocean comes from the U.S. I'm not trying to make a case about the green movement or any of that stuff, other than to say that if it turns out that automobiles are a significant reason why California appears to be significantly lower infection rates and mortality rates, and if it turns out also that this general model is correct, the Uber model, the big view, that because California's had so many Chinese visitors, that the entire state may have been, certainly LA County or whatever the case may be, may have been exposed to particularly mild forms of the virus, developed an immunity to it, and then that coupled with traveling in isolation in terms of our cars contributes to these differences between New York and LA. But the one thing Dr. Hansen does point out is that all of the computer models said that it was going to be California was going to be where the brush fire is. Hasn't been happening so far. Doesn't mean it won't happen. Doesn't mean I'm giving up on washing my hands or any of that stuff. And as soon as masks are available, I'm going to get one and I'm going to wear one. I'm going to wear one fully cognizant of the fact that it's not going to do much to protect, because even if I could get an N95 mask, I wouldn't take it. I don't need it. Those masks need to go to people who need it. These masks that protect you against breathing in the virus, those masks, every single one of them needs to go to our healthcare providers. And if somebody handed me one of those, I'd just give it to somebody who really needed it. But simple things like the cloth mask, the kind of surgeon's mask that doesn't so much seal the mouth and nose off, but basically just provides a shield, a cloth shield. It's not nearly fine enough to stop a virus, but what it is stopping is it's stopping those microscopic droplets that to some degree may be spreading throughout the room and causing infections that way. But I think mostly from watching that video, this cascading waterfall of droplets every single time you open your mouth. I've put billions of them on the table here, and I'm not even trying hard. Shouldn't watch me when I'm at a football game or something. I probably create more particles than Kansas. In any event, having looked at that video and seeing the cloud of aerosols that comes out and the waterfall of heavier particles that come out of just regular conversation, not a question of covering up a sneeze. I want to make that point. We saw the sneeze and we saw the cough. We're not talking about that. We're talking about just regular conversation. And to me, that seems worth doing, and that's why I wanted to talk about it today on this edition of the CoronaSphere Lounge. Somebody has asked me about what my prediction for the U.S. death toll is. I don't have the faintest idea. Dr. Fauci recently remarked that it would be likely somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000. He made those remarks after Dr. Neil Ferguson readjusted his computer model that predicted 500,000 deaths in the UK down to 20,000 or less. Dr. Fauci's remarks came after that. I don't know what the death toll is going to be. I just simply don't know. I do know, and I wish that that when we post these totals, I just wish that somewhere there was a website that showed the total number of COVID-19 deaths in the country, the actual number as a bar graph. And then I would like to also show the total number of deaths from heart disease, cancer, automobile accidents. You can say that none of those are preventable, and that's an excellent point. That's why we are shutting it down, is because we can impact this particular cause of death. But for example, diabetes, death from obesity related, those are preventable. And the reason I want that there is not so people just go la 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 la, but I do think that if you were to have, if you want to set the start date at January 1 or whatever, I think people need to understand what that death toll looks like in terms of what I'm just going to call the ambient mortality of the United States. We have factored into our daily lives that a certain number of people are going to be killed in car accidents, a certain number of people are going to die each year to cancer, heart disease, diabetes, all the rest of it. We have that built into our daily assessments of risks and rewards. If we really wanted to cut deaths in the country, really, really wanted to, then we would go after obesity, we'd go after diabetes and heart disease. But the only reason I think that those should be there is because when people see these numbers going up, 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 it's a natural part of psychology to think that this is it. It is true that these are what you might call excess deaths, deaths that would not have occurred otherwise. But at the same time, I think people would be comforted somewhat if they saw that, yes, this is new, and yes, this is a new addition to the nation's mortality, but at least, for God's sake, put it next to other bars that we know. Put it next to bars of heart disease. I want to say the number of people die from heart disease in this country, I want to say it's 1,600 a day. Every day. That's just heart disease. We have to have perspective. And I'll just close by saying I've seen so many cases where the American people have stepped up and continue to step up. All of these companies that are manufacturing respirators, masks, just stepping right up immediately and doing it. I think they're doing overall a really good job of responding to the degree that we were prepared. That's a different issue, but the response I think is very good. Private industry's response especially. But the one thing that I think we need to have a discussion about when this is over is the role of the media in terms of how badly they have failed us. Put aside political bias and that whole thing. Just put that away just for a minute. The media has just catastrophically failed the American people in terms of telling them what they need to know and letting people have the information. And the reason they do that is because they're convinced that because they work in skyscrapers and have press credentials that say CNN on it or whatever the case may be, that they're smarter than you are and they know what's better for you. And if they're afraid of something, then it's their job to make you afraid of it too. And they have determined that they know what's better for you than you do. And furthermore, they've determined that they can handle it and you can't. And I find that looking at the press coverage in this country, the only people that I see panicking in the country are the news media. They're the ones that seem to be in full-on panic mode. Everybody else seems to be dealing with this quite calmly. So anyway, that's about it for this edition of the CoronaSphere Lounge, episode 12, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, to whom we are extremely grateful. We've had a large influx of new members lately, and we would like very much for that to continue. Every time that we start to grow an audience base, we get a notification from YouTube saying that the algorithms have been readjusted and our views go from 30 or 40,000 average back down to 9. And then we'll build them back up. We're seeing this happen now. Now we're starting to routinely get 10, 12, 15, and so on. When that gets to be 20, 25, 30,000 views each, then they will readjust it again and take us back down to 9 again. That means that the people who have a vested interest in telling you what you should think are trying to silence us in the best way possible. They're doing it without us knowing it. There's nothing really actionable about it. And more importantly, just from this end of the camera, by choking off the views, they give me and all of the other content providers out there the sense that nobody's paying attention to this, that nobody's watching. It's just a small group of people that are watching. It makes you just want to say, I don't know if this is really worth the effort. And that's when I get back to, okay, time to look at what's actually happening. So we're very, very grateful. And if you have any friends that you'd like to tell about this, you're probably going to have to email them directly with emails and send them the links, because YouTube cannot interdict viewers if you send them a cut and paste of the URL for the video. So down there below, you'll see a button that says subscribe. If you're not a subscribed member, if you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. It should just say subscribed, and if it doesn't, hit it. And if you thought you were subscribed before, hit it again, because again, content providers talking about video games and Star Wars and all the rest are saying people are just being dropped constantly by YouTube. People are just being removed from people's accounts that they don't like. So please hit the subscribe button. That's free, doesn't take any effort. You can do it right now, and also hit the bell. The bell is there to tell you that if you hit that bell, presumably, you'll get a notification every time one of these videos comes up. So in any event, thank you for your support for everybody out there, and we're all very, very grateful. Look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat station. That's probably a joke that I'm going to just have to use. I can't control myself. It just happens. I can't help it. There you go. Think about getting a mask, and we will see you tomorrow right here on the CoronaSphere Lounge.